The United States faces a growing threat not from foreign adversaries but from within its own system of government. The very mechanisms designed to protect its citizens during times of crisis have become tools for executive overreach, eroding the balance of power and undermining democratic principles. At the heart of this issue lies the National Emergencies Act of 1976, a law originally intended to rein in presidential power but now facilitating its expansion. The NEA grants the President access to over 130 special authorities during a national emergency. These authorities range from controlling domestic transportation and suspending environmental regulations to seizing private property and deploying troops domestically. While intended for genuine emergencies, the law's vague language and low threshold for declaration have opened the door for abuse. A president can simply declare a national emergency, often with minimal justification, and unlock a toolbox of powers, typically requiring congressional approval. This ease of declaration is compounded by the difficulty in terminating these emergencies. The NEA initially granted Congress the power to end a declared emergency through a joint resolution. However, a 1983 Supreme Court decision effectively stripped Congress of this check, ruling that the legislative veto violated the separation of powers. This decision created a system where emergencies are easy to declare and incredibly difficult to stop, shifting the balance of power dangerously towards the executive branch. This imbalance has created a situation where the president can effectively bypass Congress, enacting policies with far-reaching consequences without meaningful legislative oversight. This not only undermines the democratic process, but also creates uncertainty and erodes public trust in the government's ability to act in the best interests of its citizens. The very act of governing by emergency, once reserved for exceptional circumstances, has become increasingly normalized, threatening the very fabric of American democracy. The dangers of an overly permissive emergency powers framework are not theoretical. They are evident in the actions of both Republican and Democratic administrations. Over the years, the NEA has been used to justify a wide range of executive actions, often bypassing normal legislative processes and raising serious concerns about the separation of powers. In 2019, President Trump declared a national emergency at the southern border, citing a need to secure funding for his proposed border wall after Congress refused to appropriate the requested funds. This declaration allowed him to divert billions of dollars from military construction projects to the wall, a move widely criticized as an overreach of executive power and a violation of congressional authority over spending. Similarly, in 2021, President Biden invoked emergency powers in an attempt to forgive student loan debt for millions of Americans. While framed as a response to the economic hardship caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, this action faced legal challenges and ultimately failed to withstand judicial scrutiny. Critics argued that the president was overstepping his authority and using the pandemic as a pretext to enact a policy that lacked congressional support. These examples highlight a concerning trend: the increasing use of emergency powers to achieve policy goals that would likely fail to pass through normal legislative channels. This not only undermines the role of Congress in policymaking, but also creates a dangerous precedent for future administrations seeking to circumvent democratic norms. The growing concern over the misuse of emergency powers has led to bipartisan calls for reform. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle recognize the need to restore balance to the system and ensure that these extraordinary powers are used responsibly and only when absolutely necessary. One promising effort is the Article 1 Act, a bipartisan bill introduced in Congress aimed at restoring congressional oversight of emergency declarations. The act would require a congressional vote for the continuation of any national emergency beyond 30 days, followed by an annual renewal vote. This would prevent presidents from indefinitely maintaining emergencies without legislative approval, as is currently the case. The Article 1 Act also includes provisions to expedite congressional consideration of emergency declarations, preventing delays caused by procedural hurdles such as filibusters in the Senate. Additionally, the bill mandates increased reporting requirements for the executive branch, enhancing transparency and accountability for the use of emergency powers. These reforms represent a crucial step towards reining in executive overreach and restoring the intended balance of power between the branches of government. By requiring congressional approval for the continuation of national emergencies, the Article 1 Act would ensure greater democratic accountability and prevent the unchecked use of extraordinary powers. The erosion of democratic norms and the rule of law poses a significant threat to the future of American democracy. The unchecked expansion of executive power, particularly through the misuse of emergency declarations, undermines the principles of limited government and popular sovereignty upon which the United States was founded. It is imperative that Congress act swiftly to enact meaningful reforms that restore balance to the system and safeguard the rights of all Americans. The Article 1 Act, with its bipartisan support and common sense reforms, offers a viable path forward. By requiring congressional approval for the continuation of national emergencies, the Act would ensure greater accountability and prevent the perpetual state of emergency that has become all too common. This legislation represents not only a necessary check on executive power, but also a reaffirmation of the fundamental principles of democratic governance. Beyond legislative action, it is essential to foster a renewed national commitment to the rule of law and the importance of democratic institutions. Citizens must remain vigilant in holding their elected officials accountable and demanding transparency and adherence to constitutional principles. The future of American democracy depends on the active engagement of an informed and engaged citizenry committed to upholding the values and principles that have long defined the nation.